Hi, I'm Jim Walters. Thank you very much for having me on. Hopefully, I can share some useful information or get some ideas out there for other people that are experiencing similar things that we've had. I'm on the Spring Lake Board as the lakefront property owner, riparian representative. I joined just last year, but I've lived on the lake 29 going on 30 years. So I have a lot of experience with what's happened on the lake, even with what the Lake Board has done before I became involved with it. Spring Lake is located in Ottawa County and Muskegon County, Michigan. Primarily Ottawa County, about 90% of it. It's connected to Lake Michigan by the Grand River Channel, going out to Grand Haven. The lake is about 1,091 acres with a maximum depth of 40 feet and a mean depth of 18 feet. The lake experiences some significant thermal stratification and anoxic bottom water during the summer months, and anoxia occurs about 91 days out of the year, typically June 1st to August 31st at depths greater than 15 feet, which suggests that we could have a significant problem with internal phosphorus loading, and could be an important source of phosphorus in the lake. So that's kind of the situation we've been in the past. This was addressed by the Lake Board, which I think was formed a little over 20 years ago. It's a fairly well-established Lake Board. Back in 2005, the Lake Board elected to use an alum treatment to treat the phosphorus issue in the lake. You can see from the table here, 2003 readings are phosphorus in micrograms per liter. Before the treatment, 2006, and preceding or following years is after the treatment. There was a significant decline in the phosphorus levels following that 2005 alum treatment. The levels began to rise some over time, which they do with this type of a treatment. We had some values here where you can see in 2016 on site number 2, where the phosphorus level doubled. During this time, to just mention too, we had a ban of phosphorus fertilizer. There was an extensive watershed management plan done in 2001, which I know Jim and Therese mentioned too. And I think that's a very important part of anything you're going to do on the lake. Come to find out when I pulled that up, nothing had been updated with the plan, and really beyond the alum treatment, unfortunately, nothing had been proactively done to manage the other issues that were identified in the watershed management plan. Probably for a number of reasons. Our watershed is 32,000 acres. It encompasses 11 municipalities, some of it agricultural, some of it urbanized. A lot of the area around the lake is very urbanized, but quite an issue to tackle politically and financially with a watershed that's that big. And I'll talk a little bit later about where we're headed in the future. We've identified that that's as important, if not much more so, than treating our immediate problem with the alum treatment. So here's some data again from a study. This was done and published in 2017. Dr. Alan Steinman from Grand Valley State University, the water resource program there. And this shows that in 2016, the mean fluxes in total phosphorus release were still lower than 2003 prior to the treatment. There was other testing at 2 sites in the lake that identified total phosphorus levels of 250 and 1,000 micrograms per liter. So although this data on the release of phosphorus looked good, it was somewhat in contrast with the other data showing that the phosphorus levels overall were starting to trend higher. The initial alum treatment did very well for the lake for about 15 years. Then we started to have issues with algal blooms that were problematic and water quality issues. So those total phosphorus levels done during this study back in 2016 indicated that there was a presence of some internal phosphorus loading again in the lake. In 2022, we did a sediment core analysis trying to determine what would be best going forward. Did we need to repeat the alum treatment? Was there something else we needed to do? And we had to kind of quantify and get some science behind what we're going to do. As Jim and Teresa alluded to, it's information. You have to get your data. You have to have accurate data. So the Lake Board at the time identified that We needed to sample different areas in the lake. They located 7 different spots to do the sampling. 2 cores were done at each location. We tried to pick representative locations that captured a variation across the probable sources of deep water internal phosphorus loading in Spring Lake. As you look up toward the north end of the lake, there's a watershed in that area called Norris Creek, which probably is the most significant input into Spring Lake. Spring Lake is fed by springs and creeks and then flows out down at the bottom here into the Grand River. These core samples, 2 from each site, were sent to the University of Wisconsin Stout Lab, and they did testing for phosphorus fractionation and then phosphorus release rates under anoxic conditions. The purpose of this study was threefold. Was to determine the pool of phosphorus in the lake sediments that were available for release into the overlying water column. Number 2, to measure the release rate of sediment phosphorus in a controlled lab environment. And then 3, to determine the amount of alum that would be required to inactivate the sediment phosphorus and reduce the internal phosphorus loading. It was felt that if we didn't address the internal phosphorus, any attempts to mitigate phosphorus coming into the lake from the watershed externally would likely be counteracted by the significant internal loading. In doing this, this is called a phosphorus budget. So we just basically, we identified all the different sources of phosphorus. The external loading you can see there, the sediment pool contained 58,791 pounds. The internal release annually was 7,934 pounds. So a little over half of our phosphorus from the lake was coming from this internal phosphorus loading. This is at maximum during the summer months when we get the anoxic conditions on the bottom of the lake, when that thermal stratification occurs. The external load is less during this time because we don't have runoff, we don't have the snow melt, we don't have the significant water that comes into the lake the other time. So basically during the times we're experiencing these harmful algal blooms is the time when we have the most phosphorus being loaded from the internal source. The internal phosphorus is basically 2 different breakdowns within that sediment at the bottom of the lake. There's redox sensitive phosphorus, which is a combination of labile and iron-bound phosphorus. And then there's biogenic phosphorus, which is a more readily available source of phosphorus that goes up into the water column that's controlled by some biologic activity in the sediments. The important one being the iron-bound phosphorus. A surprising result of this study that we undertook in 2022 was that not only did we have an issue with phosphorus being released under anoxic conditions, we also had a significant phosphorus release during times of high oxygen. So it was a more continuous and more year-round problem than we had anticipated, and that data was taken into account when trying to figure out how much aluminum we needed to add to the lake. So basically, the aluminum is added to the lake to bind the phosphorus more strongly than iron under anoxic conditions and hold it in the sediment, keeping it out of the water column. Reduces the phosphorus available up into the water column for an algal bloom. So this this shows the treatment zone that was identified. Again, it has to be 15 feet to have that release from the sediment cap on the bottom of the lake. Out of the 600 or out of the 1,091 acres, there's 650 acres that are 15 feet deep or deeper. This is the amount of aluminum sulfate that was calculated to be effective: 810 gallons per acre, 405 gallons per acre of sodium aluminate, and that's added as basically a pH buffering to maintain the correct pH of the lake during the application of the aluminum sulfate. The amount was calculated so that there were some unfilled binding spots on the aluminum sulfate that could intercept future phosphorus releases, either externally or from the redox sensitive phosphorus release on the bottom of the lake. This is a picture of one of the barges that we had. This barge is the large barge out of the 2. We had to come up with a staging area in order to undertake the project. We looked at boat ramps and various other locations which weren't deemed adequate, or the operation would have been too disruptive to the use of the boat ramp. Ultimately, we had a freighter shipping port that allowed us to stage there. Verplank Dock Company donated the use of their site for free. We had semi-trucks that had to come in multiple times daily to keep the tanks stocked and keep the barges going. The barges use mapping software and GPS to allow both barges to work simultaneously to complete the application on the grid that you just saw. We had daily reports on progress and safety monitoring to the Lake Board, consultant Progressive AE Company, as well as to the board itself. So this is basically an end report after the process was completed. You can see all of these daily amounts add up to the total amount applied to the lake. There were some days that we had high winds that precluded them being able to complete the day or do anything during that day. Other days you can see they went well into the evening, catching up, and basically went to schedule. The cost was a total of $3.3 million. We had to take out a municipal bond for $2.65 million, which we had guaranteed by the municipalities. The Lake Board is not an entity that's able to guarantee a bond for that amount. So basically, they had to guarantee that they would continue to collect the assessments from lakefront property owners. How that's worked, at least for us, it's set up long before I got there. It's $600 for a lakefront property owner per year, $300 for what they call a backlot, so somebody who might have deeded access. And then marinas or neighborhoods with shared marinas, that type of thing, had various different assessments based on their size. There was no alteration in the pH, no adverse effects or fish kills during the entire application. And there's also no recreational water use or irrigation restrictions. So this is a picture of the application on the main body of Spring Lake, kind of looking north to south. Again, no restrictions for people or pets, no effect on fishing. The community was asked to avoid boat traffic within 200 feet of the barges during the application. The Lake Board sent out a newsletter to all the lakefront property owners prior to initiating this project. We put a website announcement up, and we had a press release to the local newspaper. We tried to dispel a lot of the misconceptions that this was a weed killer or an herbicide being applied to the lake, and that it was going to be harmful to fish that were on spawning grounds in the springtime. It's kind of a difficult process to explain to people, but I think all these releases went a long way to creating an understanding for the need to do this, why we were doing it, and what the expected outcome would be. It's not simply a herbicide or weed killer. This is another picture from a similar spot on the lake. You can see that the trail behind the barge is the precipitant that occurs. It's called flock. And that precipitates, removes the phosphate and some particulate matter from the water as it settles on the bottom. The flock then forms a thin layer over the sediment cap, which holds in phosphorus that's already bound from the initial application and has ability to bind additional phosphorus and keep it from being released up into the water column, so it's not available for algal blooms. The initial results have been very positive. In June, we did a testing just after completion. We had below 20 parts per billion of phosphorus. We did a Secchi disc reading for water clarity, which is a black and white disc that's lowered into the water, and you basically look down to see how far you can see in the water. We had readings from 7 to 9 feet, which is a significant improvement from what we've had in the past, as much as 3 times better than we've had in the past. We're going to do a full set of phosphorus levels in August, which we feel is going to be a lot more indicative of the success of this, since August and into September is typically when we have the historically greatest release of phosphorus from the lake bottom sediment internally. We also have the largest algal blooms. So based on what we've seen so far, we're very hopeful that this is going to be successful. The last treatment was, and we hope to gain many years of successful control of the phosphorus level in the lake with this. So this is a picture from my dock that I took on June 23rd. It's certainly not indicative of what it's like in August. We've had a lot of churning of the lake, a lot of traffic with Coast Guard Festival this past week, and a lot of recreational use, but the water is still definitely more clear than I've seen in many years. We've had comments from the public after this treatment that have generally been very positive. People that really had no idea that the treatment was applied. They sent emails in saying they were very pleased with the quality of the lake. Whatever we're doing, keep doing it. It looks great. It's better than last year. They can't believe it, that type of thing. So along with that, we still are going to continue what the Lake Board has been doing in past years. We have targeted aquatic plant control for invasive aquatic plants and some targeted control of native species if they're an issue. If we do have algal blooms, we will continue to spot treat that as needed. Since completion of this, we've formed a technical committee on the Lake Board and are fully engaged in trying to work on our watershed management. We know that's an issue. It wasn't dealt with in the past, and we're very excited going forward to kind of hit that head on. We are going to have to redo our watershed management plan, which is about $120,000, but we've identified some ways to save money with that and get that completed. We need to get Section 319 of the Clean Water Act approval in order to get any funding from outside sources, which we think is going to be very important to engage in some of those watershed management projects that are going to be crucial to trying to maintain some improved health in the lake that we achieve after the alum treatment. But glad to entertain any questions anyone may have regarding what we've done from our experience. So thank you again.
Thank you. That was a fantastic overview. And you mentioned Coast Guard Festival. I was out in Grand Haven for Coast Guard Festival
Yes,
just last weekend.
it's
I believe it's a crazy week. We've got someone wondering, you mentioned that you would consider spot treatment for algal blooms moving forward. What sort of treatments might you use?
basically aquatic herbicides. If we have, so we have these areas that are bayous on the outskirts of the lake that are not the main body and can be an issue with more stagnant water. And so if needed, we work through Progressive AE to identify what those areas are. And then we have a company that out of, I believe, Caledonia that has performed treatments for us in past years. So it's again, based on the species identified and what the recommendation is for treatment. Some things we have to get approval for as well before applying any herbicides.
Did you say how long you expect the latest alum treatment to last?
Well, I don't know that we have an exact expectation. It's a eutrophic lake, and over time things are going to be harder to control for sure. But we had 15 good years after the last one. I'm hopeful with the identification that we had additional phosphorus release even under levels of high oxygen that we appropriately through our consultant added enough of the alum to accommodate future phosphorus release. So if we could get 15 years or longer, I think that buys us time to really dig into what we need to do for some of our watershed management.
I'm going to real quick read out a question and answer that Paul answered in text. Chuck was wondering why you chose alum over newer technologies like Phoslock, and Paul answered it was mainly for price and overall effectiveness for internal loading when you were dealing with iron-bound phosphorus. And as a little teaser for our next presentation, Sylvia will be talking a little bit more about research into treatments like Phoslock. Could you tell us a little bit about the composition of your lake board? What sort of expertise and backgrounds do you have represented on it?
Sure. So our lake encompasses multiple municipalities. The seats on the lake board were determined, I think, when it was first founded 20 plus years ago. I'm the riparian lakefront property owner representative. There's only one of me. Everybody else is from one of the municipalities that fronts Spring Lake. Muskegon County and Ottawa County both have frontage on Spring Lake. So we have the Water Resources Commissioner for Muskegon County, as well as for Spring Lake, which I think is a really nice asset for the board because they have a lot of information on the projects they're working on in our watershed and are very helpful in directing us toward funding sources as well. We have an ongoing project through Ottawa County from some funds that became available through the Monsanto settlement. That was a lawsuit that gave funding toward Ottawa County to use for these types of things. So they're going to be doing some things that will help reduce the cost of of redoing our watershed management plan. They can do it at a more cost-effective rate. So those type of people on the board are helpful. We have a county commissioner from each county as well. So that's basically the makeup of the board. Typically, the representatives from the municipalities are people that live on the lake as well and have a vested interest.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Geneva, and thank you, Jim.